outing the energy-sapping economic, political, government forces who would thwart Malcolm Bendall's molten sea arc atomic reconstruction technology.
Ballsy thinking, the gender-agnostic antidote to sloppy thinking.
Recently, an American visitor came to the MSAART demo site, and when I walked into the sort of demo room where we're building different chondas to run on different types of fuel, you know, diesel, petrol, leachate, LPG, all that sort of stuff, he came over and he hugged me. And he said, "You were the first one to alert me to the molten sea arc technology with your video of Malcolm Bendall, greatest ballsy thinker." And I was really taken by that. Obviously I was very appreciative. But the other thing that it made me realise is that, you know, I've had lots of comments on the MSAART technology since that video, on the subsequent videos that I've done, and many of them are questioning whether or not this technology will ever see the light of day commercially, because will it be stopped, you know, by vested interests? And so in this video it's all about sort of outing what I call the forces that are trying to thwart the development of the molten sea arc atomic reconstruction technology. And one of the revealing moments to me earlier this year was when I got hold of a book called Hidden Energy. Hidden Energy, the Tesla-inspired inventors and a mindful path to energy abundance. And it's by Jeane Manning and Susan Manewich, two American ladies who do an incredible job in tracing the roots of Tesla's discoveries, Nikola Tesla, and how in so many ways they've been thwarted by various forces. And this video actually uses the book quite extensively to, I quote from the book quite extensively. The interesting thing from what Malcolm's been doing and relating it to Tesla is what Tesla said about radiant energy and his description of the universe and what his findings really were about. And they're very simple. Tesla said, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency and vibration. And of course that is critical to all the work that Malcolm has been doing. It's interesting, you've got some skeptics and cretins on the web who just look only at what he's done in terms of the thunderstorm generator and so on, but actually behind that there's a whole theory, a new theory of how we look at the world, which he's posited, particularly through the Plasmoid unification model, which I've mentioned before and has now been taken much further by Alchemical Science, whose videos are just unbelievably good. That man takes a lot of the sort of general theory and sort of really simplifies it. So that's very important. But I guess the key thing is, if you look at people who study Tesla, one of the key things that they recognize is in this quote, as you can see, from a man called Dr. Peter Lindemann, who you know, is the best known for his authority on what Tesla called radiant energy. And this is the universal energy that Tesla talked about may turn out to manifest as a life force or an invisible field everywhere. And you remember the sort of tower that he tried to create, which would give energy to everyone, you know, electricity to everyone. And today it's all about 0 point energy, and that's the term I use in this video. And in the book Hidden Energy, they have a little diagram which I'm showing now, and you can see the various different ways in which the sort of radiant energy of Tesla has been used and renamed. I sometimes just shorten it to zero energy, which is a bit silly, but and it's not on that bubble. I think I might create another bubble. But the core of the 0 point energy piece is this quote from Hidden Energy. It's really worth just sort of looking at and analysing. Throughout history, says Jim Murray, who's an expert on Tesla's work, individuals have glimpsed the non-physical universal spiraling of energy, the invisible vortices that create matter and destroy and create again endlessly. The same dynamic is available everywhere, from the galactic down to the submicroscopic scale. And of course plasmoids are an extremely important phenomenon on this, and since I did my video back in February on the molten sea arc technology, it just seems there's a whole bunch more, many of which is already existing, on what plasmoids are and their importance really to the whole universe. The other thing that is important to note is that most recently enlightened engineers see how they can build generators that tap into vortex power, and which can be found throughout the universe. Now that's something that is very important to Malcolm's work. He often talks about the Ranque Hilsch vortex. He's credited that, standing on the shoulders of others, and that's extremely important to understanding the Tesla aspect of this whole new plasmoid unification model. But getting acceptance of the vortices and the importance of them is not going to be an easy task. As Murray says, it won't be easy, not because of the technical limitations, but rather because of the inability to think outside existing paradigm and our fear of clashing with vested interests who would gladly doom us all to a perpetual, filthy, inefficient internal combustion engines. And Murray continues, he said humankind needs to progress beyond quantum mechanics to working with a fundamental and sublime power source. He suggested that fellow scientists rely on the power of inspiration to aid them in this great understanding. Inspiration is what Malcolm's been given me, or I've been inspired by Malcolm for over a decade working with him. At the end of the video I talk a little bit about Malcolm and his travels, so that's a bonus for you. And I give a website which I've created, which gives you some background on a fictional book that was loosely based on Malcolm's travels and his work. So I hope you enjoy that. But here are the forces which I believe are thwarting the development of plasmoid technology.
Thwarting Force 1, the financial industrial complex.
So the overwhelming macro force, and the biggest force which is overarching everything, of course, is the global financial industrial complex. Now, you'll know of President Eisenhower's famous words about the military industrial complex. In the councils of government, he said, we must guard against the acquisition of unwanted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex. Well, of course, the military now can't even afford to put up their own satellites, and really are a busted flush in terms of procurement. You've got, NASA is subcontracting to people like Elon Musk and so on, and the military really, in terms of being an industrial complex, have been overtaken by the bankers. So what is the financialization? Well, the financialization is the preeminence of financial institutions who've taken over really industrial capitalism, and have now really are sitting in the control of where things go in terms of public policy, whether it be bond vigilantes or the huge inflated assets of the central bank behind me, not only the UK but all the central banks. But it is something that we need to bear in mind because it infects investment decisions, particularly with respect to the investment into zero energy projects. That's because at the moment the religion of the financial industrial complex is climate change or net zero, and this influences everything, all of the decisions that are being made, and is distorting investment priorities, particularly with net zero, because they've hooked on to one thing primarily only, and that is battery powered vehicles and battery powered houses and so on. It's all about electrification, and this really does stop any, it's crowding out any ideas for alternative energy sources. Of course, any sophisticated investor, particularly those who are part of the global financial industrial complex are going to hedge their bets, just as hedge funds do, and are going to be supporting and protecting fossil fuels and legacy companies who have traditional sources of fuel. And there's a reason for that, because a lot of the banks have big term loans which are still outstanding to these companies, and the many year licenses they have to extract fossil fuels and so on. Now, in hidden energy, Carlson von Dask says the following: a financial system based on the value of petrodollars and benefiting from utility companies' debts would try to stop or at least regulate anything that weakens its control. Those debts requiring interest to be paid to Wall Street banks for creating money to build energy mega projects. Having said all this, it's got to be said that understanding the new paradigm of zero energy and the molten sea arc atomic reconstruction technology is difficult for many investors, professionally sophisticated investors, who, because of the loose money of quantitative easing, have many other opportunities to get a great return on something much more certain than investing in zero energy or MSAART. And it's up to us on this side to actually try to simplify the concepts, and I think we've been doing a good job of that this year, but even so, to trying to overcome some of the other forces that we've spoken about in this video is becoming easier, but it's still difficult. So that's number one. The global financial industrial complex, which has been is rising in power over the last 20 years. Thwarting force number two: national governments. According to Hidden Energy, another force which thwarts the adoption of zero energy technologies is national governments. And their take is that national governments fear the loss of tax base that comes from legacy energy systems, but the most significant risk on thwarting national governments is they distort the tax system, they distort subsidies in order to support the sort of climate change net zero policies that they're completely linked into, which obviously means that trying to raise money for zero energy projects is much more difficult because they're not condoned by national governments. National governments are really frightened about the geopolitical implications of zero energy systems, which obviously create energy sources which are much less expensive than what's currently on offer. And in the building behind me, you can only think about the number of wars that have been instigated in order to protect energy to the UK, and indeed often in conjunction or almost exclusively in conjunction with our allies, the United States, where we interfere in the Middle East in order to try to ensure that there's a regular supply of oil coming into our Western economies. Thwarting Force 3, the deep state. And if we include national governments as one of the forces thwarting the rollout of zero energy technologies, then we've got to include their Praetorian Guard, like the SIS, the Secret Intelligence Services, or the MI6, which are hosted in the building behind me, or just down the road, MI5 in the UK, which is the Internal Security Services. And of course, in the United States, we might call these people the deep state. And if I talked about the deep state a few years ago, they'd be taking me away in a straitjacket and calling me a bit of a loony. But the fact is, we now know just how powerful the deep state is, whether it's the CIA or whether it's the FBI in America, or indeed our intelligence services over here. After the dossier, the Steele dossier with Trump, and the way that the FBI is behaving almost extrajudiciously against some of its opponents in the United States, we can now say these are the people who are able to act on the government's orders, the national government's orders. And what do they say about this in the Hidden Energy book? Well, very simple. Van Dosk says this: some inventors in the new energy field have received notice that their invention is under secrecy order and they can no longer work on the energy device or talk openly about it. They are told it is a matter of national security. Well, what a surprise. the fact is, since the early days of the oil companies, big oil, from the even when the Rockefeller oil companies were broken up, you can tell the famous book in the 1970s and 80s from Anthony Sampson called The Seven Sisters, which explains how the security services intervened in Iraq and Iran and indeed created those states around a map of oil and energy, and indeed Saudi Arabia, even back in the days with Roosevelt going and organising the whole of the Arab world around their potential to supply us oil. So we know that that is something that the deep state or the Praetorian Guard of national governments are quite prepared to do, so why not now?
Thwarting Force 4, State Finance Quangos.
Okay, so far we've done the global financial industrial complex, which obviously overarches everything in my view. We've got national governments, and we've got one arm of their sort of policing of how they can thwart sort of the new 0-point energy technologies is the deep state, and the other is this one which we've got here behind me, and that is their own department of energy and net zero. Now, the net zero is perfectly good. There's no question about that, because of course the zero energy technologies could be part of net zero, but the way they use the powers and the levers that they have is what's not so good. And here we come to the QUANGOS that are overseen by this department, quasi-autonomous non-governmental bodies, okay, QUANGOS. And this happens in both America and it happens here in the UK, and they award grants to research for research grants for companies just like those who might be formed to pursue zero energy technologies, but of course they will never get a look in. And you can know that the reason why that is because of the situation that we saw at the beginning of this video, where the paradigm shift has not taken place. So they're supporting old paradigms. They're not supporting the Tesla technologies and those that are new and are from ancient transcripts. They're supporting old ones, and you can see this really not only here in the UK but with the Horizon program. The Horizon program is a European research organisation that doles out literally tens of millions to different projects, and I worked on one back in 2019, and I think there were 13 different universities from around Europe working on trying to identify early onset of Alzheimer's. And we met in Amsterdam, and really it was a cake and arse party, to be honest with you. We didn't get any money in the end, but these projects are given out millions at a time. But the point is, it's the whole construct upon which both Horizon and indeed our own research grants are based. They're based on a particular understanding of what is required to stop climate change and net zero. And you can see here Professor Fenton, who really recently tweeted out that in case anybody is still in doubt about how UK-based research is with respect to climate change, the government has just announced 30 million in totally useless propaganda to try to justify net zero. And there we can look at the aims of the research organisation, which is going to be dishing out the grants for health co-benefits of the transition to net zero. And it's all about thinking about electrification, and it's talking about technologies which, as far as we're concerned, as people who understand zero-based energy technology, is old think. And so that's the problem with what how the government arms itself to try to thwart what we're trying to do. In America, it's quite simple. It's the same thing, and let's go back to Hidden Energy, that great book, and see what they say. In a letter to the former President Barack Obama during Obama's administration, it was just the roadblocks to scientific breakthroughs were discussed. Today in America, just like here behind me, administrators decide which research areas are likely to be fruitful. Then research must show progress within their niche or risk losing their paycheck. This means that rather than just stepping aside to investigate an unknown that could overturn our thinking about something important, the process of vetting, i.e. deciding whose work deserves funding, is weighted. When someone applies for a grant, its administrators appoint an established leader in the field to review applications. Such leaders are naturally inclined to support applicants whose views agree with their own. Well, I can tell you now, I don't think there are many leaders that I know in our scientific community, or indeed in the US scientific community, who have any real understanding of zero energy concepts, and indeed the things that Tesla inspired so many years ago. Just to finish, the scientist's letter to the White House said a solution requires dealing with those elephants in the room, the mainstream scientific leaders who are reluctant to consider ideas that threaten their own well-funded efforts, which invariably represent the status quo. And that's it in a nutshell. If you're trying to represent the status quo and defend that, then you're thwarting zero energy technologies and new concepts coming through which could really save humanity.
Malcolm Bendall, the world's greatest ballsy thinker.
And so where does this leave us as we come to the end of this vlog, talking about the forces, the political, economic and social forces that are thwarting the rollout of zero energy products? How successful are they today, and what sort of journey has Malcolm made? Well, I first met Malcolm when I was trying to raise money for my business, and he was trying to raise money for his mining business, where he had Tasmanian licenses for oil, and we would have long conversations about what is now the molten sea arc technology. And really, for the past 12 years, with every month at least, I've spoken to him and I know where he is and what he's been doing, and he's just been on the road. And extraordinary times. During COVID, he sort of hung out on a island off of Scandinavia to complete his notes. So how was the trip?
Contested.
Contested, really? You were noshing away, didn't you? You look good.
Yeah,
You look healthy. What did they think about your mask on the plane?
actually, I had the best mask in the whole plane.
And then of course the big one was he went to Maldives, which it has no extradition treaties with the United States and so on, as an independent jurisdiction, and he finished his notes and put them up on strikefoundation.earth, where you can see all of his notes. And since then he's done Tesla Tech, and he's spoken openly about the principal concepts behind the molten sea arc technology. So it's very hard for the deep state or the banks or others really to shut this down now. There's a growing momentum as more scientists, particularly the VORTEX mathematic guys, who sort of come out of left field and are real purists in terms of the mathematics behind the molten sea arc technology. And Randall, Carlson, who speaks up through his broadcast channel about ancient geometry, and certain governments are definitely much more willing to support the ideas behind MSAART, such as the Indian government, because of course their countries have a good understanding of the Sanskrits and the sort of ancient scripts that Malcolm went on a world tour to find and uncover before he developed his Plasmoid unification model and so on. So I think investors will come round to developing this technology. I think the big guys, big corporates, will certainly start to get involved, and it's just interesting to understand and know a little bit more about Malcolm's journey. And there's a book. It's a fiction book which is written by Roland Perry, who's one of the great authors in Australia, and who's done a fictional account, should I say, of a character very much like Malcolm called Al Hort. And this is a secret bonus to this video, if you followed me this far, is that I've captured a lot of the interviews from the launch of The Shaman, which can be grabbed on Amazon. And if you go to theshaman.uk, you can see those interviews by which Roland Perry gives to radio stations and talks about the book. Fictional, completely fictional, completely fictional, although I must say I certainly recognise certain episodes in the book, because later on in it I sort of, as I said, I've been watching Malcolm for 12 years, so it's interesting to see the fictionalised account of this character Al Hort come to life. So that's it. If you've not seen my other videos on molten sea arc atomic reconstruction technology, I'll post them down in the I'll post them down below, but really just the whole Ballsy Thinking channel is really got quite a few videos on this man, Malcolm Bendall, not least because he's the world's greatest ballsy thinker.
Ballsy thinking, the gender agnostic antidote to sloppy thinking.